So good afternoon. With us today is Matt Schmidt and Jeanette Tomeo, and the session is Broadband Ready, Cross-Sector Collaboration for Competitive 21st Century Digital Economy and Workforce. And Matt and Jeanette, the floor is now yours.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the chance to join you today. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And so I can get in the weeds really quickly on broadband. But again, we'll try to make this next 60 minutes as dynamic as we can. I'm Matt Schmidt. I'm the Director of the State Office of Broadband, located within the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. And in the next 45 minutes or so with our slides, Jeanette and I will give you a rundown on a really interesting project that we're collaborating on. And so we'd like to keep this as dynamic and loose as we can. And so please don't hesitate if you have any questions along the way. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat box. But like I start all conversations, or at least most conversations about broadband in Illinois, I like to talk about our beloved three-legged stool. And this is our way of kind of bringing to life the holistic approach that we take to broadband. In so many conversations, broadband is about access. It's about infrastructure. Where is the connectivity and where isn't it? But that's just one leg of the stool. And so we've been very intentional about talking about each of those three legs of the stool. Access is one of them, but also adoption and affordability and digital literacy skills, the know-how that it takes to use the internet once you have it. And then finally, utilization, what you do with it when you have it. And so those three legs of the stool are integral. You've heard this analogy before. If one of those legs is missing, that stool tips over. And so that summarizes our holistic approach in Illinois with our Office of Broadband to thinking about how to promote broadband across the board throughout the state in a holistic manner. Now, before we take any more time with slides, I wanted to share a poll with folks just to get a sense as to your understanding of the lay of the land in Illinois. And so we've got a question for folks, and we'll launch this poll right now. How many Illinois households have broadband capacity? And so I'd like you all to please weigh in here on the poll and let me know what you think. All right, I think we've got pretty good participation here. We'll give a couple more minutes here for other folks to join in. All right, if we can get a couple more votes, we'll close the polling. All right, in the interest of time, we'll end the polling right now. But so the question here, how many Illinois households have broadband capacity? It's a tough one. And if you look at different aspects of this question, you'll get a richer understanding of what's actually happening in Illinois. And so when you look at this answer, how many households? Well, white households with wireline broadband subscriptions, 71.2%. So that answer was right for that aspect of the question. But households with populations between the ages of 65 and 74, 63.8%. Latino households, 63.4%. African-American households, 57.9%. Households with populations of 75-year-old residents or older, 44.8%. And surprisingly, the most surprising to me, households with children under the age of 18 without wireline high-speed broadband subscription, 20% of those households. So when you look at the era of a pandemic in which we're in, where remote learning is not just a nicety, but it's a necessity, it's part of our everyday lives, that education gap looms large in Illinois. And so we just wanted to take a quick moment and share the slide with folks. Moving ahead now, past this three-legged stool, I want you to think about that poll, think about this stool. This is central to our conversation moving forward. So in addition to talking about that three-legged stool, another thing that I like to focus on during these sorts of conversations is the great wealth of information that's available on our Connect Illinois website. And so just about everything we do is available through our Connect Illinois website. I'm not going to take you through it, and forgive me, it's a little clunky, but we've got a revised edition coming out here in the next few weeks for our whole department that's going to be pretty sleek. But the point here is we've got lots of great information up there, from our strategic plan to access for Wi-Fi hotspot maps, to low and reduced cost broadband and subscription services, and also some interactive mapping. And that's another thing that we'll be sharing with the public in the next couple of weeks, a year-long effort to get the most accurate, granular, timely data that we possibly can with broadband mapping. All of that will be available through our Connect Illinois website. And much of what I reference here in the slides ahead, you can also go back and check out, learn more at our Connect Illinois website. The easiest way to get there is probably just to search Connect Illinois Broadband. It'll take you right there. So moving on, I wanted to just spend a little bit of time talking about one thing that we share on our Connect Illinois website, and this is our broadband strategic plan. You notice February 2020 is when we published this, right before the pandemic set in. We've learned a lot since then, but we still think that this strategic plan offers some guidance for how we are targeting resources and programming in Illinois. We do expect, though, post-pandemic to have a revised strategic plan. But what we set out to do is define what is basic broadband. We adhere our standard with that of the Federal Communications Commission. So 25 megabits per second down, 3 megabits per second up, that 25/3 standard of wireline service. That's our kind of standard for what is broadband in Illinois. And that will allow this sort of communication where you have video, live streaming both ways. In addition to that goal, we also make sure that all investments that we're making in Illinois are scalable to broadband of at least 100 megabits per second download, 100 megabits per second upload, which is really important for planning for the future and future investments in broadband. We also have a definition of unserved areas in Illinois, and those are areas, excuse me, and those are areas that fall below that 25/3 threshold, and also underserved areas, areas that fall below the 100/20 threshold in Illinois. And so just some common terminology that we use. What is broadband? What are underserved areas? What are unserved areas? In addition to that, we've got goals that we've set in place. By 2024, we want to make sure all households in every corner of the state and everywhere in between have access to at least basic broadband of 25/3. And we recognize that that is just the entry level for broadband. We want to be investing in fully scalable broadband to provide service and performance far beyond that. But we want to make sure that at least every household has that basic access. In addition to that, we want to make sure, as I mentioned earlier, that all the investments that we're making in Illinois are future-proof, are looking to the future and future needs. And so by 2028, we want to make sure that all households exceed that 25/3 level and have at least 100/20 service. And what does that mean? Users, multiple users in a household can be engaging in remote learning or telehealth or work from home. You can have video going on in multiple computers at one time, or devices for that matter. And also, we have a goal. We want to be a leader in broadband. We recognize that other states are making investments, that the goalposts are moving, and that we don't want to just meet our own static goals, but we want to make sure that Illinois is positioned to compete with other states in the country and other markets in the world. And so by 2028, we also want to make sure that we're in the top 12 globally for broadband access and also top 3 nationally. And then finally, in terms of goals, we want to make sure that we're leveraging this investment in broadband to the fullest. And so it's not just about connectivity, it's what we do with it. How are we using this broadband to drive economic development in applications in remote learning or telehealth or work from home, the sorts of things that have become commonplace during the pandemic. So that's one big aspect of our broadband strategic plan, that investment in infrastructure and basic connectivity, and making sure that we're positioning Illinois to succeed in the years ahead. But if you hearken back to that three-legged stool, it's not just about infrastructure. We're also really interested in digital literacy, adoption, and inclusion, and making sure that we're doing everything we can to address that kind of barrier to broadband utilization. And so we've increasingly stood up programming to get at that broadband know-how that's central to digital literacy. And in addition, we're working with communities and organizations around the state to promote broadband planning and capacity building at the local level to help our communities have a stronger role in charting their broadband futures. If you leave it up to the private market or other stakeholders, you might not get what you want. You might not have the level of service that you think is going to put your community in a position to succeed and compete in the 21st century. So we want to strengthen the role of our communities. So I just wanted to take a quick minute and talk about mapping. So much could be said about mapping in Illinois, but if you look at the map that I'm sharing with you right now, there's a lot of work to do. The green areas, those are the areas that fall below that basic threshold for broadband of 25/3. So in those green areas, remote learning, telehealth, working from home can all be challenges. In the dark blue areas, those are the areas where we have service of at least 100 megabits per second down by 20 megabits per second up, that 100/20 threshold. So those areas we consider to be served. The light blue areas, those are areas in between, underserved that have decent access, but we still want to target resources to improve connectivity moving forward. So a lot of work to do in the years ahead in making investments. Do you have a question? Okay, just a quick transition slide here, going from our talk of infrastructure and program related to infrastructure expansion to the work that we're doing in digital equity. We'll talk a lot about our Broadband READY program today, the regional collaboration for adoption and digital equity. But in addition to that, we have a digital navigator program, our Illinois Connected Communities program, and also some work with computer refurbishing that we'll speak to in a moment. And so, quick report out on our Connect Illinois Round 1. This is our infrastructure investment. We have the country's largest state matching grant program at $400 million. We are in the midst of Round 2 funding. Round 1 matched $50 million of state funding with $65 million of non-state match to provide over 26,000 new or improved connections around the state. And so we're looking to build off of that momentum in subsequent rounds and take $1 state investment and try to turn it into at least $2 of overall investment in broadband infrastructure in the state. And so a little bit more detail about our approach to infrastructure. Moving past that infrastructure conversation, we have a digital navigator program. We're accepting applications on a recurring basis throughout the year, and we hope to build capacity at the local and community level for promoting digital adoption and literacy skills to help folks better understand how to use the internet once they have it. Think of like the modern librarian who's helping patrons get on the computer, use the internet. We want to have that capacity at the community and organizational level around the state to make sure that we're eliminating gaps in how to use broadband wherever we can. We also have our Illinois Connected Communities program. This is the actual program that works with communities at the local level to build capacity and to drive broadband planning efforts. In addition to providing 50+ hours of free consultant time to those communities, we also put them through a best practice curriculum focused on adoption and access and utilization, so that that community comes out after that roughly 12-month engagement much better positioned to succeed in the 21st century, work with the provider community, and address gaps where they exist. Here's a quick map of our Illinois Connected Communities program. The stars in blue represent our first cohort. The stars in green are where we made Connect Illinois infrastructure investments. And in the coming weeks, we'll be announcing our second cohort of Illinois Connected Communities, focused on planning and capacity building. We really think it's incredibly important that we do this sort of work so that we're able to leverage state and federal dollars to the fullest. So I wanted to take a quick minute here and talk about another kind of map here. And it's kind of sad that this is something that we shine a bright light on, but this is where free, publicly available Wi-Fi is available in Illinois. And this is a map that we put together about a year ago in collaboration with other agencies like our libraries, our schools, higher education institutions, and others, just to provide a resource for the public to know if they need Wi-Fi for work, for signing up for benefits, for remote learning or telehealth even, that they know where they can go. And I say it's kind of sad that we point to this because in the 21st century, in the year 2021, you would hope that everybody had access to affordable, high quality broadband at home. But we know that that's simply not the fact. And so that's why we've invested some time and energy in putting forward this kind of resource to help folks who don't have that at home access find access where they need it. Another piece that we have in our program, in our repertoire, if you will, is our computer equity network. And this is getting at the gap in at-home computers or connected devices that exist in Illinois. And based on census data from 2019, we know over 1 million homes in Illinois, in fact, 1.1 million homes lack access to a computing device that's capable of connecting to the internet. And so in addition to making sure we're addressing gaps based upon access through infrastructure and network capacity, we want to make sure that we're putting a computer or a connectable device in the hands of households in Illinois that need them. And so with a partnership across the state with a nonprofit called PCs for People and others, we are sourcing used computers, refurbishing them, updating their hardware and software, and then redistributing them on an equitable basis to families in need. I can go on and on about this partnership and what it means to the state, but this is something that we're really proud of. We have events throughout the state at the county by county basis. So I want to take a quick minute and talk a little bit about our Broadband Advisory Council. This is a council that convened in August of 2019, and it advises on policy and programming for our Office of Broadband. one thing that we did last year that I think is really important is we took a directive from the Illinois General Assembly to conduct an affordability study, and we worked with some experts in the field to develop a methodology and get a handle on how much it would cost Illinois to provide free or affordable broadband for the entire population or subsets of the population, for instance, households living in poverty. And so we thought it's a really good marker to understand what kind of costs we would be talking about if we wanted to take a step in making sure that we are doing something on the affordability front. And so the methodology that our researchers used broke the state up into four basically buckets. Connected households that have devices, that's 72% of the population, so that's pretty good. They have a device, they have a connection. But then we also have device deficient households where you have a connection, but not necessarily a computer or a device. That measured at 4%. I actually think that number is a little bit higher. Internet insufficient, and that's where you lacked connectivity, only connectivity, 10%. And then fully disconnected, where there wasn't a computer or a computing device or an internet connection, 14%. And so those numbers drove the study and our understanding of the cost that it would take to ensure affordable broadband and connectivity to all homes in Illinois. And so just quickly, part of this work included some work on adoption and understanding who's actually signing up for service around the state. So looking at 4 regions in the state, we have 10 economic development regions, 4 regions that we're working with through our Broadband READY program. You can see that there's a pretty big shift from the southern region to the northern state line region in terms of at-home subscription rates. That's essentially the proportion of households in that region that are signing up for broadband, from 47% all the way up to nearly 70%, which is just about the state average. All right, some more information regarding our affordability study is available on our Connect Illinois website. I'm not going to run through this, but I just wanted to point to this if you're interested in learning more. It's a really great study, and you can find a lot of information. And the study itself is linked to our website. But just quickly, the take home, sizable homework gap. Over 285,000 Illinois households with school-age children lack that wireline connectivity that provides reliable, affordable broadband to do remote learning, for instance. Again, that lack of at-home computers, over 1 million, 1.1 in fact. And then the fact that the connections that we're making and the investment that we're making in our Connect Illinois infrastructure program is on par with what the study indicated, to make sure that we've got 25/3 service, that basic threshold throughout the state by 2024. The amount of funding that we're investing at the state level, if you pair that with private investment and federal dollars, we're on par to actually meet our goal. And so with that said, I wanted to turn it over to you, Jeanette. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them right now. Otherwise, we can save them for the end.
Thank you, Matt. Rebecca had a question that really applies to multiple communities. If they needed to train teachers and in order to train students and to train the field personnel to do the same for HSE and ESL, could they apply for funds for a specific location or for hardware? And where could they find information about the Wi-Fi hotspots for Monroe and Randolph County, Illinois?
Sure. So we're on a recurring basis, we're taking information in to populate that Wi-Fi hotspot map so that it's as accurate as possible. And I know that it doesn't have all the publicly available Wi-Fi available in Illinois. And so that's why we're constantly asking for information. But if anybody would like to zoom in on that map or get some more granular data on what that map is telling us, I'd be happy to provide that offline. The best way to reach us is simply broadband@illinois.gov. Send us an email, and our Illinois Broadband Office staff of 2, including me, one of us will check it and we'll get back to you right away. If it's a link, if it's a follow-up, if it's a conversation, we're happy to do that. And so Jeanette, I know there was another question just about resources, and I don't want to speak too definitively on resources because there is an unprecedented level of federal investment in broadband that's coming through a variety of sources. And we're looking to get additional details on what can be made possible through that funding. A couple pieces that I think are worth flagging is the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program that's administered through the Federal Communications Commission, but it's actually up to $50 subsidy off of your monthly broadband plan for qualifying households in need. That's one way of helping folks adopt or sign up for broadband. For planning grants, we look forward to continuing to have our Illinois Connected Communities work, but we also are planning a kind of a webinar series for communities to help them understand all of the opportunities that are out there and on-ramps, if you will, to additional funding. And so for today's purpose, I'll leave it right there. If there's an additional question or more specific, please feel free to follow up and we'll try to get to that in the Q&A session.
Great.
A lot of
Thank you,
opportunity.
Matt.
Yeah, Jeanette. So I'll quit talking. The floor is yours.
No problem. Thank you, Matt. So I'm Jeanette Tamayo, and I'm a visiting senior policy advisor for economic development and equity for the Illinois Innovation Network and the University of Illinois system. And if you're wondering why we're talking about equity in the context of broadband, Congressman John Lewis said, access to the internet is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Next slide. Matt's driving the slides.
Okay.
Why is this important? Because when we think about equity, we often think about, sometimes think about it from the comparative goals or the personal assessment that goes to the individual. But today we're really going to talk about community equity. And what does it mean when we're looking to change the conditions, not from an improvement perspective of outsiders coming in to change the dynamic, but rather of enhancing what's already there in order to bring everyone along with the new technology and the new opportunities. Next slide. Personal focus really allows us to key in on ensuring that each student receives what they need. That alone, in an equity perspective for broadband, doesn't accomplish it. The group focus doesn't accomplish it either, because while it really goes to the heart of everyone being able to participate in civic and economic life, it's still divided. It's that equity focus in community that makes the significant difference. And that's because residents are engaged in the decision-making. They know the issues, they know the challenges, they know the solutions, and very often it's a question of how you get from one place to another. And as we broach broadband, we're looking at it from an inclusive economic development perspective. Next slide. And that means not focusing on the equipment. Yes, you can have the laptop, and yes, you can have the hotspot. But is that really equity if you need just one tool and it's not part of your daily life? Next slide. On community equity, when we're looking at it, we're thinking about the historical infrastructure that has existed in the state of Illinois and in some communities more than others. Physical infrastructure, such as broadband or such as utilities and transportation systems and buildings, has often been used to facilitate segregation, very often to also increase gentrification. There has been, over the past 10 years, a suburbanization of poverty that has really displaced and disconnected individuals from their community. And the community services that would typically be available are no longer available, either because of the suburbanization of poverty, the displacement, we have the ongoing pandemic, or because the systems are overwhelmed and their capacity is capped. So if we're going to look at community equity and how we keep families connected towards a new economy, we really have to think about it differently than we have ever thought before when we're looking at fiber in the ground or infrastructure. We have to focus on community engagement, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and capacity building for everyone. Next slide. Thank you. And that is absolutely critical for addressing the digital divide, because the digital connection today is our lifeline connectivity. And we have to think about it as the beneficiaries, not only the users of the programs, but the beneficiaries. When we talk about a senior divide, they may have the equipment, but do they really know how to utilize it? And so they are receiving the benefit of the infrastructure, and we have to expand how we think about our programming to ensure that our programs and our community initiatives are fully integrated, that they're targeting specific needs, and that every single user and every single resident throughout the entire phase of a community and place in the community are connected. Next slide. Thank you, Mia, for doing this. And that really comes down to how we set the stage for community collaboration. And as we move forward with our Broadband Ready program and thinking about equity in the context of broadband, we're really looking at our residents and citizens as being the equitable beneficiaries and participants in shared decisions, in identifying community-centered solutions that address the problem. And when we're thinking about it, we're thinking about the doors that we're building, the persons we invite, the tables we're setting, the voices we hear, the opportunities we create to change the dynamic around broadband. If access to the internet is a civil rights issue of the 21st century, then everyone needs to have a seat at the table. Everyone needs to have a voice. And when we're building it, we need to ensure that we're not replicating a past that disproportionately segregated some folks and gentrified other folks out of their community. Next slide. And to do that, we have to approach it from a community development model. And there are many models for community development. One of those models is looking at complete communities. And very typically, a complete community focuses on all of the physical infrastructure and uses words such as healthy and livable, inclusive and active. But what does that really mean? What it means is that we have to have a shared goal with the community. And we have to recognize that community is where folks live, work, play, worship, and learn. Therefore, all of the tools and all of the infrastructure needs to support those goals. And in building community-centered facilities and activities, we have to recognize that the facilities need to be completely accessible. And if internet and broadband is the means of accessibility, then we need to figure out how to integrate it into every aspect of community life so that everyone can participate in the activities. And when we're able to do that, that's when we're transformationally utilizing place. And that becomes really important in thinking about complete communities. Because back in the day, when the highways were being built, we weren't thinking of the communities, we were thinking of getting from point A to point B. And when we were building utilities and placing them in the ground, we weren't thinking about who would come next. We were thinking about who was there. If we're going to build 21st century cities that link to 21st century economies, we need to rethink what a complete community is. And next slide, please. And that means that we also have to rethink how we approach placemaking. And placemaking typically has three components. There's a very traditional placemaking, and you hear about it with economic development and the new building that's going up or the new station that's going up somewhere. There's tactical placemaking, which is really looking at green spaces and how to incorporate some of our exterior. But there's strategic placemaking where we're really zooming in on the identity of a community. So do we want to create Zoom cities and Zoom towns where there's broad-based connectivity? We can now live and work anywhere. We've proven that in the past year. What does that do to our community identity? We can think about the user needs because our needs have changed from once in a while being able to serve the internet to remote working and remote learning and having multiple individuals in the same household having the same technology needs at the same time. And we need to think about that community input and response to what does the community want for itself? Because it's not enough to talk about the quality of community or to talk about complete communities as in the previous slide, or livable communities that you can walk and tour in any way. We really need to talk about connected communities, because a connected community is connected internally. It's connected to the necessary services such as 911 our hospital services. A connected community is connected to the school district and to the workplace learning centers. It's connected to the manufacturing and to the business and to the retail services in the community, and it's connected to the external world. Because right now, from an economic development view, no community is a standalone community. Every single community is connected in some way with someone external to them. And the more that we engage in the 21st century economy that is based on technology, the more important it becomes that we are connected and that our workforce retains the ability to be connected. Next slide, please. And that's absolutely critical because employers go to where they find regional clusters. Very often, what drives industry is the industry cluster. And that is necessary in order to align the workforce with the job pools of where the work will be. It's tied to the infrastructure and it's tied to civic life. All of these are interrelated points that really impact on sustainable and inclusive prosperity, which ultimately is everyone's goal. How do we ensure that we do this? Well, there are multiple ways to ensure this. Next slide, please. And one of the ways is that we have to look at an asset-based community development approach. We have to look at closing the gaps, connecting within the community. So it's connecting everyone strategically in a network. And very often we think about it as social networks or the social capital or the thought leadership or the unelected leaders within a community. But it's also that physical infrastructure. And we need to do this, we need to make this connection be very outcome focused. So it's not about being able to drive to the library to get a hotspot there to do your homework. It's about being able to connect broadband so that regardless of where you're located, regardless of the zip code you're born in, regardless of the zip code you live in, regardless of the zip code you work in, you are digitally connected and you can benefit from this technology and from this civil rights perspective. Next slide. And that's because students, when we think about students and we're thinking about this library and how students learn, very often we approach workforce from an education perspective. And we say, well, education is the foundation to everything. And education will lead to work experience, and that work experience will generate income that ultimately will generate wealth. And that wealth creates options, lifelong options for the beneficiary. But that assumes that you're starting with a safety net security. And terms like stability and reliability and affordability and accessibility and connectivity are part of your daily environment, so much so that you don't even think about them because they just exist. But that is not the reality for many of our communities. In fact, it's the opposite. If we could go to the next slide. Their safety net insecurity is the building block. And those wonderful words of affordability and connectivity, they're not there. In fact, the focus is on getting the safety net, on first finding that safety net and supporting an entire household, because the income of one is not going to support the household. So it's household support and it's work, any paid work for multiple sources of income. So it's gig work and multiple side hustles and multiple part-time employment. Any type of income that cobbled together creates a financial base. And that leads to aspirations. But if you notice in this slide, education, training, and career aren't built in to the model. They're aspirations. Digital equity, digital literacy, the ability to be able to access the internet, to have the technology available, to know how to utilize the technology, either for yourself or so you can guide your student along, and the ability to use that technology to connect with the workforce, with training, with education, with employment, with mental health, with physical health, or with any other activity is absolutely critical to shifting from this deficit view to one that is student-centered and focused on providing every student what they need. We could go to the next slide. Thank you. And this is very, very important to keep in mind as we think about broadband and equity, which very often aren't part of the same sentence, but they need to be, because digital equity is what provides hope and success. The civil rights issues of the 1960s is what generated so much hope for the past 50 years. And there were so many programs that were tied to making sure that civil rights opened the doors so folks from every walk of life could participate fully in civic life and in economic life. Today, digital literacy, digital tools, and broadband are the ones that are opening those doors. And in this Jamboard, there are a couple of items, this was taken at a particular session, but there are a couple of items that really jump out. One is options, and one is greater equity via access, that expanded opportunity and the ability for knowledge growth by the community, being able to translate and take that information and use all of these tools in a transformative way. Next slide, please. And that is one of the things that the Illinois Innovation Network is doing. And this is what I started out with where I work and what we wanted to share with you as well, is these are 12 state universities along with 3 hubs, one in Peoria, one in Rockford, and one in Illinois, that are focused on pushing out that knowledge and helping identify ways in which to support the communities as they go through their economic development, workforce development, and economic growth trajectory. The hubs are building different innovation centers that are targeted to specific areas, but generally focusing on computing and data, food and agriculture, entrepreneurship, environment and water, health and wellness, economic drivers. They have been identified in the state's economic development plan, and they tie in specifically to industry needs. Next slide. The hubs are focused on driving inclusive innovation. And we're talking about workforce development. We talk about it as equitable workforce development, because there has to be an opportunity for every person, and every person has the ability and the capacity to contribute. The challenge as providers is making sure that we are developing and designing the programs with them in mind so that we can provide the necessary resources that employers need, because ultimately employers are the ones who are creating jobs. They're creating the sustainable economic growth. And so it's these three, it's the 3-legged stool that Matt talks about, these 3 legs of the IIN that really build out the IIN. We could go to the next slide. And this is just a slide of the 12 universities and the 3 hubs. Tied to each of the economic development regions and each of the workforce development regions, there's a hub that is serving one of the communities with a goal of pushing this information out. And why does it become important that you have Research One institutions as well as smaller institutions and hubs collaborating and working with the community? It becomes important because when you look at the economic growth of the state of Illinois, next slide, please, it's about the value that working committees focused on specific areas. So here we have education and workforce, research and collaboration, and entrepreneurship and corporate engagement, with corporate engagement being the employers, that are working together to drive one key point, and that's how do we help generate more prosperity for Illinois? How do we help elevate its workforce to meet the demands of the employers? Next slide. And that's because a Boston Consulting Group study from December of 2019 identified that we have the capacity and the ability to create or fill 48,000 new economy jobs in Illinois, that we can anticipate creating 9,500 jobs annually. Now, we know that the pandemic has impacted this number somewhat. Yet, what this represents is that we have the opportunity to impact 23,000 individuals from underrepresented backgrounds, gain new jobs in the economy. And how are they going to do this? They're going to do this by having an equity-based framework in which we're making the decisions around physical infrastructure and around connectivity and around what defines a complete community. Next slide, please. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Matt to talk about how we're meeting this economic challenge today.
All right, thanks so much, Jeanette. That was great. And if folks had any questions about how broadband and workforce development go hand in hand after my 20 minutes, hopefully many of those questions were answered with Jeanette's great presentation and overview of how the equity angle fits in as well. I think so much of what we do with broadband is really tied to equity, and that's why I'm so, excited about this Broadband Ready program that we're going to speak to in more detail here in the upcoming slides. And so READY, again, stands for Regional Engagement for Adoption and Digital Equity. We think that that is the program, the structure, our programmatic infrastructure, if you will, for us to take next steps on the equity frame. And so what we're trying to do here is at the regional level, get a greater understanding of where we are today on a number of fronts with access and infrastructure, also with adoption and affordability, and then finally with use and what are the best practices that are out there. And I know sitting in the Office of Broadband, we've got a couple of locations, one in Chicago and Springfield, that if we just sit in our offices, we're not going to get those answers, that we need to engage the communities around the state. And we feel as though the regional layer, that lens is going to allow us to be closer to what's happening, to where the strengths and weaknesses, county by county, community by community, region by region throughout the state. And so our Broadband Ready program is just up and running right now. And again, central to it is this three-legged stool that I already hammered home, so I'm not going to say again, but the continued focus on access, adoption, and utilization. It is part of a broader view that we have in Illinois to match our nation-leading investment in broadband infrastructure with a commensurate investment in broadband inquiry and engagement. And so we want to be really intentional about making relationships with higher education, our community and economic developers, our planning institutions, and also folks on the ground doing the work with our schools, our hospitals, libraries, get as close as we can to what's happening in Illinois and to document it. I had a professor in grad school who said, Matt, what gets measured gets done. If you're not serious about measuring something, you're not serious about doing something about that. And so what we're trying to do is track where we are, where we want to go, and mark progress along the way. And so that's what this READY program is about, balancing short-term broadband access expansion with local energy and ideas and some resources with that commitment to uncovering good data, best practices, documenting it, and then targeting resources accordingly. And so we've got some data that we're able to leverage for this. We've got our Broadband Advisory Council study on affordability that I mentioned at the outset. We've got mapping regarding access that we've got on our Connect Illinois website right now, but also some much better, more accurate, more granular, timely mapping that we'll be posting there in the coming weeks. We also have data on adoption from the American Community Survey, but we don't have a lot of great examples of what's actually working in remote learning or telehealth or work from home or community-driven or local economic development. And so bringing that together is really the focus of this Broadband Ready program. And in my mind, Jeanette talks so eloquently about placemaking, about what is a connected community in the 21st century. Well, it goes far beyond simply having that broadband connection, but to connections in other facets of our life, our civic life, our economy. And so this program is trying to get at the heart of that, where we are today. And so we've broken up into two initial cohorts of our 10 economic development regions of the state. We're working with 4, the southern, the southeastern, the east central, and the northern state line region in our first cohort. We'll have a second cohort later this year, and then we hope to provide annual updates to this work on an ongoing basis. Again, regional engagement for adoption, digital equity, determining where we are, tracking progress, meeting our goals through targeted investment. And so our specific deliverables include community technology access expansion. And so that's that focus on making sure that we're doing everything we can to promote access expansion in the midst of a pandemic. And so public Wi-Fi, integration of our computer equity network and refurbished computers, also digital literacy programming, other ways of focusing on access and use. But also we want to document what we're doing through a digital indicator dashboard. I'll preview that in a couple of slides, and also a current conditions summary and a digital divide elimination plan, all of which comprise our Broadband Ready report. And this is something that we are focused on, not setting on a shelf and collecting dust with it, but rather an articulation of where we are and where we want to go and how we're going to get there. And the point is, this isn't something the Office of Broadband is doing. This is something that we are assisting our regions and the communities therein to do together. And so I'm really excited about this, because I think it's a great way of adding some authenticity and really decentralizing what we're doing in Illinois, get as close to the community level as we possibly can. All right, and so I have a bunch of slides here on data, and I'm going to run through these really quick. We can come back if there are any questions. I just want to make sure that we leave some time open at the back end here for all the questions that we may have that we haven't gotten to yet. But one way of kickstarting this work is we've put together some regional data profiles that are just a quick snapshot of different aspects of, the data profile for each of our regions. We're working with Dr. Roberto Gallardo from Purdue University, who's done this kind of work around the country. And Roberto would not be upset if I said we're trying to steal his ideas and apply them here in Illinois. And so what we hope to do is work with Roberto and his team and set up dashboards and continue it on our own on an ongoing basis in the years ahead. And so with these profiles and the dashboards that result, we're going to have a number of socioeconomic factors and how they each tie to broadband. We also will be looking at broadband availability. And you can see here, you have a couple spectra, all houses that have access at that 100 by 20 threshold, or no houses that have access at that 100 by 20 threshold, and where each community in each region rests on that continuum. Likewise for basic broadband of 25 by 3. So measuring that access and availability. Also, we're really interested in looking at adoption, and not just numbers on, okay, adoption rates region-wide, but getting down to the county or community level, and also looking at different aspects of adoption data, such as the homework gap, which households don't have computer access or internet access, but they do have kids that are engaging in remote learning. That's something we really want to have a good understanding on so we can target resources accordingly. Likewise, the senior gap. How can you possibly sign up for a vaccination if you're not able to hop online these days? It's a real key aspect of engaging in 21st century healthcare now, but so many other aspects of our civic life, of family life, of our economic life. And then also looking at various factors that feed into a community's level of digital distress. That is, to the extent to which they are well-positioned or poorly positioned to succeed in a 21st century economy. And so we look at those data and trends. We also look at other aspects of the digital divide, digital economy jobs, remote work and e-learning vulnerability. Again, the extent to which a community is positioned to take advantage of remote work and e-learning, and then occupations with digital skills. And so you can see we're trying to get at this question of what makes a community in the 21st century competitive and what makes a workforce in that 21st century economy competitive. And so this is some data that's available, but through our READY program, we're looking at getting a better understanding of other data that we can either leverage or bring into the conversations, appreciation for where we are and where we want to go. Here's just a quick snapshot in our southeast region of the state, the homework gap, if you will. And these are households that under the age of 18, and they have no internet access. And so we've put this into low, medium, or high based upon the extent to which households don't have that access, 10% or above, or 2.4% and below, or those in the middle. And you can see in the southeast region, we've got some pockets where that homework gap is pretty pervasive. Likewise, with the senior gap, same kind of idea, but we're looking at populations of seniors age 65 or over that don't have internet access at home. Again, this is in our east central region of the state, some areas where we really see some trouble and where we would want to target resources accordingly. Shifting gears a little bit, looking at the percentage of digital economy jobs, we're staying in that same east central region, and you can look at the counties they're in: Champaign, Douglas, Ford, right across the board. Compare those to statewide averages of the percentage of the economy jobs that are tied to digital economy work. And so it ranges from 13.3 in Douglas County all the way up to 20.4 in Iroquois County. And the sense is these data are great. They point you in the direction for future inquiry. What's going on in one county that leads to a relatively high share of digital economy jobs? Is that something that can be leveraged, that can be replicated or grown? And so you want to get a deep understanding of what's happening in a county where there's relative success and what might be happening in a county where there's relative deficit. And that's one way to get a better appreciation of where we are, how to target resources or programming. And again, tying back to workforce development, what sorts of interventions or programming might be required to get all counties, all communities up to par, to optimize our role in the digital economy. And then you can see here in this graph, the share of occupations by digital skill level. And I won't get into too much detail here, but you can see at the bottom a low, medium, or high across the board, the share of the occupations by digital skill level from one county to the next. The differences might seem relatively minor, but nonetheless, it's telling a story in the economic profile, the jobs profile from one county to the next. In the interest of time, we'll leave it there, but this is the kind of data that we're trying to bring into the conversation. And then here we have ventures. This is from GoDaddy data of all things, but it's basically business startups that use websites, and they have it listed websites per 100 residents, and it'll show from one county to the next within this particular region, the East Central region, the share of websites per 100 residents. So you can see in Champaign County, not surprising, relative strength of ventures. And then finally, a sneak peek at that digital indicator dashboard. We're looking at doing one of these for each of our Broadband Ready regions, but also starting out with a statewide profile that provides a snapshot of where we are in one online source that can bring to life current conditions and key digital indicators. Again, hearkening back to that sage advice from our grad school professor: what gets measured gets done. We're measuring broadband access through mapping, and you can see that at the right here. But if we're not doing the rest of this measurement, how do we know where we are? How do we know where we want to go? And how do we know if the interventions and the investments in the programming that we are pursuing are successful? And so this is just kind of the beta version of a profile of a digital indicator dashboard that we're using to drive conversations in investment programming. And you can see along the top here, we've got some columns: digital demographics, so reference to that homework gap, the senior gap, digital distress. These would all be hyperlinked to more data in more granular mapping. Likewise, access and availability. So you can see those unconnected households, unserved or underserved, the gains that we're making from one year to the next. Average upload and download speeds based upon speed test data generated at the household, breakdown of data by county within a region. And then as you move across, you have adoption and affordability, more information regarding public Wi-Fi, cost per megabit per second in the region versus the statewide average. Also how folks are getting their broadband, whether it's cellular or wireline or satellite, if you will. And then also what kind of devices you see at home, tablets versus desktop or laptop computers, the region versus statewide averages. And then finally, I think an area where we have a lot of work to do, but a lot of opportunity, is getting a better handle on, all right, what are the use cases, the best practices, and how broadband is being leveraged for the 21st century life and economy. So you got a couple examples here: virtual interactions based upon telehealth visits, students with district provided devices. So basically getting at that question about one aspect of the homework gap. And then also this is an indicator that that was brought to us by the Learning Technology Center here in Illinois, the teacher instructional setting. Basically, the extent to which a teacher's day and the average thereof across a school district, across a region, is hybrid, remote, in-person, or other. It's really interesting to share this, to see this instructional setting from pre-pandemic to the midst of the pandemic to post-pandemic, to see how reliant we have become on remote learning. And so with that said, there's so much more that could be shared here, but I'll leave it at that. And we've gotten to a number of questions along the way here, but really open it up for any additional questions folks may have. And thank you again, Jeanette, for your great insight into the equity angle on so much of what we're doing.
Great presentation, Matt. We're certainly open to questions. There's a question about the drive-out hotspots for WIOA areas, number 21, number 22, and number 23, if possible. But Matt, if you could just address what's happening with hotspots and how you're approaching hotspots generally.
Yeah, and we certainly can toggle back to the map, but I'm not sure if looking at the map is going to help, but we can if you'd like us to. But I think the point with the hotspot map is that we want to make sure that we have as accurate a map as we can on where publicly available Wi-Fi is. For those who cannot afford broadband service at home, or for those who may have broadband, but there are data caps, and there's certain times late in the billing cycle where you're not able to use the internet for what you want to use it for, or maybe there are weather interruptions, or too many users on at once, whatever the case may be, you just don't have that at-home service that you need. We want to be able to do everything that we can to share with the public where public free Wi-Fi is available. And we don't just have a data layer that we can point to and say, hey, this is it, it's comprehensive. We have to gather that data. And so we have a survey instrument that we share with various stakeholder groups on a periodic basis. If there's a group that would like us to share that survey instrument with you, it's basically a matter of just giving you access to putting in some geolocation data, and then it filters into our map. We'd be happy to share that. And again, if folks zoom in and say, you know what, it's not accurate, or there's stuff that's missing, we want to spend some time making sure that we're getting that map to where it should be. And again, that's just one of many maps that we have, but we think for folks who don't have other options, it's important that we invest in it. Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that map.
Thank you, Alice, for that question. Here's another question. Must you have fiber in the ground everywhere in Illinois, or are there alternatives?
Yeah, and so I think the reality here is that is the standard that we really aspire to, is making, doing what we can with our public dollars that we're investing in broadband to essentially future-proof our investment in connectivity. Fiber, for its part, is fully scalable. You can put it in the ground and then change the electronic components on either end of the connection to dramatically ramp up bandwidth and service. And so you can go from 100 by 100 service to a gig by a gig to 10 gig by 10 gig, depending on the need over time. But we also recognize that that's not practical everywhere, particularly in really rural areas. And so from our standpoint, we are technology agnostic, if you will. We want to try to spur on as much investment in a variety of technologies as we possibly can. And at the end of the day, technology competition is not a bad thing. And so if you have a few different providers in your area, that tends to improve service and actually push down pricing and make it more affordable for folks. And so I think it's an all hands on deck approach to getting broadband out throughout Illinois. We're working closely with our provider community, but it's also important to inspire interest and engagement with our local communities, because you all have a say in this, and you should have a say in this, whether it's a local city council or a village board or your county. We want you engaged in this conversation. There are unprecedented investments being made at the federal level, not to mention our own Connect Illinois grant program. We want to take full advantage of that. And that's why we're promoting collaboration wherever we can. Sorry, I can do short answers to simple questions too, but that was a good one.
That's okay. This is a question about offering equipment, and what is PC for people?
Oh yeah, so they're a nonprofit, and they operate in about a half a dozen states around the country. The closest, I think, right now they're in Ohio, but they're also in Missouri. They have 2 locations in Chicago, one in Chicago Southlands in Cook County, and also in Metro East in Belleville. And the idea is they work their tails off to source to use computers from the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Through their own workforce, they refurbish them and upload software and hardware. And then on an equitable basis to families in need, they'll work with local organizations to distribute those computers. And so we have a goal here in the first year of their work in Illinois, 20,000 computers sourced, refurbished, redistributed. And they're not the only computer refurbisher in Illinois, but they are the largest. And we look to leverage PCs for People to establish a robust statewide computer refurbishing network, getting all hands on deck from various organizations that do similar work.
Great, thank you. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box or ask.
And Jeanette, if we weren't so late on time here, I'd ask you a bunch of questions about your presentation. I thought, the reference to Zoom cities that you made, I think that's just so instructive on kind of where we're at and where, I think demographics and movement might be in populations moving forward. But I think you harken back to placemaking and the investments that are made at that community level. What sorts of things can we do that are intentional to make our communities, wherever they are, every corner of the state, is attractive to families and in the workforce in the 21st century. And, I don't mean to, toot our own horn, but we tend to think broadband is an important part of that placemaking equation. And so we want to do what we can to give communities and organizations the strongest hand possible.
It is, and I hearken back to Congressman John Lewis's statement about the civil rights issue of the 21st century, because when you think about where accessibility and opportunity is, it is in the digital economy, it is digital connectivity, and it's a loop. Not only do we have to train, we have to make sure that everything is connected. And so a connected community, that's a strong community. And with the census information we just heard about Illinois, we want to make sure that we're doing everything to encourage folks to stay here, come here, make Illinois your home, your workplace, and be part of what is truly a transformative state at this point in time.
This has been absolutely fantastic. I want to thank you both for your time today. There are lots of requests for the presentation, so just a couple housekeeping items to wrap us up. The presentation itself, a PDF of that, will be up within 48 hours. The recording of this awesome and dynamic session will be up within 2 weeks, possibly earlier. You can check back. But definitely within 2 weeks. So if you have any questions, I know both Matt and Jeanette have shared their contact information. This has been just a fantastic session, and thank you both very much for presenting at the WIOA Summit for us today. And thank you all for your attendance. Just a little note, we have planned in a break, as you would have if you were in a regular conference, a chance to check your email, possibly, grab a coffee, a snack, something like that. There is no longer conference chicken available, but there is some other snacks, I'm sure, somewhere in your house you can grab. We will be reconvening at 3 p.m. and we will be hearing from each of the core partner program leads about really looking at service and system integration and what that implementation looks like for the state. So I do invite you to join us at 3 p.m. But for right now, you have a nice 40-minute break where you can get caught up on email from all the regular work that you've been missing today in your attendance here. So thank you all so very much, and I look forward to seeing you at 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.